Ethel Smyth's The Wreckers is an opera set on the southwest coast of Cornwall in the United Kingdom. Perhaps indicative of an incredibly cosmopolitan society during this time, despite the subject matter and Smyth being English, the opera's initial libretto was in French. However, Smyth had difficulty securing a performance for a French-speaking audience, and as a result, the first performance was given in the German language to a German-speaking audience in Leipzig in 1906. Today I want to look at the opening 27 bars of the Wreckers Overture. Featuring 3 orchestrations of similar melodies, I want to analyse how Smyth varies the orchestration and thematic material to create an exciting curtain raiser for her opera. Following this, I want to take a melody I composed in 2016 for a pirate exploration game and reorchestrate it for a similar orchestra that Smyth uses. I also want to try and reapply similar orchestration and composition strategies and devices that she uses too. The aim is to create a classic swashbuckler sketch reminiscent of Golden Age cinema, or at the very least have 3 solid orchestrations that help us further our knowledge and skills as composers and orchestrators. Either way, I hope you'll join me on this swashbuckling adventure. As it's such a short extract, we'll take a listen to the opening of Smyth's Overture and then begin our analyses. I'll put a link below to a full score video of the Overture 2. The Wreckers Overture is orchestrated for a standard arrangement of strings with an unspecified number of chairs. However, given the period, it's likely Smyth would anticipate a larger string orchestra. The table on screen highlights the woodwind and brass instruments that Smyth specifies for her piece. These include 3 flutes, one of which is doubled by piccolo, 3 oboes, one of which is doubled by cor anglais or English horn, 3 clarinets, 1 doubling bass clarinet, 3 bassoons, 1 doubling contrabassoon, and then in the brass section there's 4 horns, 2 trumpets, 3 trombones, one of which is a bass trombone, and tuba. There is also a timpanist and 2 percussion parts, however only the timpani is used in the extracts that we analyse, and also it's only the piccolo of the woodwind auxiliaries that I've highlighted that Smyth uses in the extract that we're analysing too. The overture also makes use of a harp and an organ, however the extracts that we're looking at only use harp. In the Wreckers Overture, the opening orchestration is a beautiful, simple octave unison that clearly states a thematic idea that will be reiterated in different forms throughout the opera. However, Smyth is particular about her orchestration of this octave unison, choosing not to make it an orchestral tutti. Being specific gives her a bold opening to the overture while not being overbearing. It also means that we do not hear every colour in the orchestra at once, saving some colours for later. The theme spreads across 4 octaves. In the highest octave, coloured in blue, Smyth uses 2 flutes, 2 clarinets and the first violins. In the middle high octave, which I've coloured in red, there is a single trumpet, the second violins and violas, while 1 bassoon, 2 horns and cellos take the middle low octave, which I've coloured in orange. Reserved for the lowest octave, there is the single bassoon and the double bass section, which I've coloured in purple, and a timpani punctuates a couple of moments through this orchestration. The second orchestration is probably the most complex of the 3, despite not featuring all the instruments like the third orchestration does. The reason for this is that many of the instruments momentarily switch roles to help out certain voices within the texture. For example, the violas and cellos take up the melody for just 4 notes between bars 3 and 4 after rehearsal mark 1, before reverting to a accompanimental role. Similarly, the 3rd and 4th horns double the bass part in the 5th and 6th bar after rehearsal mark 1 again. Certain instruments therefore switch roles based on where they find themselves and where they are needed. This orchestration, to draw a comparison with sport, makes me think of the concept of total football. Not that I am particularly knowledgeable when it comes to football, but nevertheless, football players in a total football strategy take up roles based on the context and position they find themselves in and the game in. In this instance, instrumental lines switch roles to help a part, such as a melody or bass line, cut through the texture. However, some roles remain fixed, such as for bassoons and double basses. In this instance, these instruments remain usually on the bass line, at least in the orchestrations we're looking at. Maybe we could see them as the goalkeepers. In my annotation on screen, the categorization of different accompaniments, such as 1 and 2, is arbitrary. They're not specific to a particular idea and are just used to demonstrate how there are, different accompanimental figures within the whole accompanimental part, if you like. For example, the pizzicato, viola and cello parts are different to the trilling flutes, piccolo and clarinets. However, both are fulfilling accompanimental roles. In Smyth's third orchestration, the orchestra remains in 4 parts. However, the roles are no longer fragmented but more rigid. In other words, if an instrument is fulfilling a role in the orchestration, it does so for, if not the entirety, then most of the section. Moreover, the roles are changed from orchestration 2, and the bass part is now also the melody line. Given power and weight, the bass melody part is performed in 2 octaves. The strident upper octave has 1 bassoon, bass trombone and cellos, while the weightier lower octave is given to the second bassoon, tuba and double basses. Accompaniment 1, like accompaniment 2 in this example, take up harmony notes. However, accompaniment 1 takes on greater rhythmic independence, while accompaniment 2 acts more like a pad, playing longer sustained notes. The oboes, horns and trumpets provide dynamism by punctuating a 3-bar repeated phrase, which changes to function with the harmony. Accompaniment 3, or what I call thrilling trills, tremolos, flurries and runs, adds to the energy and excitement of this orchestration by filling out the texture and giving it dynamism and energy. The flutes and clarinets perform fingered tremolo, while the harp and violins exchange runs, bowed tremolos and roll chords with one another. The timpani performs a roll on the tonic note of the key throughout this orchestration. Before going on to talk about my orchestrations, comparing them to Smyth's, it's probably worth hearing them first. Lasting about a minute, here is my 3 orchestrations on an original Swashbuckler theme. Catchy title, am I right? The first orchestration is the easiest to compare as it was the clearest and easiest to replicate, or rather, it's harder to deviate from without being completely different. I copy Smyth's orchestration and texture using the same instruments across the octaves, excluding a single change. The one change I made was to drop the clarinets an octave. The reason for this is that my melody is in G minor rather than D minor, which leads my melody into a very high register for the clarinet, a register described by Samuel Adler as piercing and shrill. Smyth briefly enters this range or register at the high point of her melody in the Wreckers Overture. As the high point, though, it could be argued that the clarinet's piercing quality was desirable here to add further intensity to the melody line. For my orchestration, the context is different, and it would be in such a register for too long to know real effects. Therefore, I decided to drop both of them an octave onto the high mid part. The second orchestration is both similar and different. It's similar in that it redeploys the concept of fragmenting, or what we liken to total football, but for orchestra, where parts switch roles. However, I also maintain individuality by exploring the concept in itself. Essentially, there is a combination of my inherent orchestration style, Smyth's work, and an understanding of the total orchestra concept, which leads to something novel for me, if not wholly groundbreaking. Obviously, this was more difficult to achieve in the previous orchestration, as we were copying something that had a simpler orchestration and texture was monophonic. In the second orchestration, there are smaller scale details that I take directly from the Wreckers, beyond the broader concept of fragmenting. For instance, the iambic 6/8 rhythmic figure that Smyth uses in this orchestration. She gives this idea to her horns and pizzicato violas and cellos. I do something similar. I also move towards a more homophonic texture as the section progresses, like Smyth does, and use melodic motifs in the bass part as well. However, again, these concepts are beautifully broad and have plenty of utility and space for exploration. Plenty of other people will do them as well. Smyth just happens to be under our spotlight here, providing us with a means of practicing orchestration. My third orchestration is similar to Smyth's again, as was my intent, placing the melody part in the bass, using the same doublings as Smyth as well. The instruments, up to where my annotations end, maintain their roles in the texture too. The reason the annotations end is because I start to deviate to try and just round the orchestrations off musically. Some compelling considerations emerged while orchestrating this sketch. I was initially concerned by the tremolo in the clarinet part as it crossed what is known as the break. Falling between B flat and B natural, the break is where the clarinet passes into its clarina register, which is much stronger than the register just below it. I wondered if this would cause issues, as it can be quite an awkward key change for the player. However, it turns out they have additional keys to get around this issue. The problem is the quality and security can be variable. For this reason, I decided to voice the clarinets on different chord tones, as seen in the score. The other finer detail that is worth discussing here is dovetailing. Smyth's violin runs in her orchestration do not dovetail, whereas mine do. Dovetailing is where one line crosses over with another to minimise the gap between phrases. In Smyth's overture, the semiquaver runs end before a new one starts. However, mine share a note at their respective beginning and end points. There is no right or wrong here, instead it is a matter of effect. If you want runs to be divided across parts, but seamless, then dovetail. If you need the runs to be broken apart, possibly to give a stronger sense of meter or pulse, then do not dovetail them. While on this extract of Smyth's overture, why the sectional divisy? She could have simply divided the part across the two violin sections. Well, again, it depends on the effect. As discussed in my article and video on Ray Vaughan Williams' Dives and Lazarus, it was common for orchestras to have the violin sections on opposing sides of the stage. Doing this facilitated a degree of antiphonal control, much like stereo panning. It's possible that Smyth did not want the effect of having the run sound antiphonally between the two sides of the string orchestra, so one run would come on the left and then suddenly on the right. Therefore, she divises the runs within the sections themselves so they continually sound from both sides of the orchestra. We have our sketches, and I feel it has been a very worthwhile study. Imitation and the reapplication of techniques is an invaluable way of learning. I have an original, smaller orchestration of my Swashbuckler theme already from when I originally wrote it several years ago. Maybe I could have made some bigger orchestrations without looking at Smyth's Wreckers Overture. However, if I'd done that, where would I be? You can pick up skills by practicing alone. I may have stumbled across a technique while sketching these materials out. However, in trying to imitate and reapply these ideas, there is a process of validation coming from an authority beyond myself, the original orchestrations. If an orchestration works for a formidable composer like Ethel Smyth, they work for me as well.